Hi, and welcome to Let's Talk AppSecOps. My name is Mark Lambert. I'm the Chief Product Officer here at ArmorCode, and I'm joined by Stephen de Vries from Arius Risk for our second episode on threat modeling. Stephen, thank you for coming back. Really enjoyed the last conversation where we're talking about basics and getting going and why it's important. Looking forward to continuing that conversation today.
Great to be back, Mark, and to talk to you again about threat modeling.
Yeah. So one of the things that comes up, we talked about the challenges for threat modeling, kind of getting started and kind of like, quick wins in the prior episode. That's usually the first thing that I hear is like, hey, I don't know what to do, right? The second thing is, well, that's design, and the design's constantly evolving. There is the concept of runtime architectural review, right? Saying, hey, let me just analyze the application and tell you what's inside of there, which is kind of like late in threat modeling, but done way too late. Can you contrast those two things for me, and then really let's talk about how can I keep my threat model in alignment with my evolving design, especially in an agile world?
Yeah, I think that last phrase you use is key, right? My evolving design. And if we go back to the physical world, when we build up a house or something complex, we have a design. Like there's an architect, there's somebody who says these are the size of the beams we need over this surface. These are how big windows can possibly be, because if they're any bigger, the thing falls in. So we have a plan, and even if that plan changes over time, I'm building an extension, I'm adding something to it, I have a plan for that too. So it's important that you have a plan. It's also important to understand, what are you building? So I don't know if it works in the US, but you usually have building inspectors that will come around and say, well, yeah, this is what's on the plan. This is what you intend to do. And this is what they've actually gone and built. And yeah, it's kind of okay. And this is where we need to be. So I think there's room for both of those activities in software. There's room for, we need a plan. We need to know what we intend to do from a security perspective. Our plan for security is our threat model, right? That's where we decide what we want to do. As we then go and build it, and as we're building more complex applications, and they're now not monoliths anymore, they're now a whole bunch of stitched together microservices, it starts becoming really important to understand, well, how are those things talking to each other? How are they connected? So if you have things like runtime threat modeling or runtime application analysis, that's useful, because then you can contrast, well, this is the thing that we ended up with, and this is the thing that we wanted to build, and are those two things the same thing? And if they're not the same thing, what's different about them? And is it still okay? Have we inadvertently opened ourselves up for attack because we've deviated from the plan?
Yeah, and the building inspector thing is like, we definitely have those in California, and they don't usually say that's okay. They normally say that needs to be changed. So I've got my initial threat model. I've done it as part of my design process. I'm then using my my runtime analysis of the application really is kind of like a check and balances against that threat modeling, identifying gap, and then I update my threat model iteratively.
Yeah, and what we also see, a lot of our clients do is they embed threat modeling as part of the development process. So, again, but by using the term threat modeling, we always, it always sounds like it's this special security activity done by those guys in the leather jackets, but it's really designing for security. If we say you're designing for security, it makes a lot more sense. And you say, well, when you are designing the functionality, you also design for security in that exact same activity. So it's just an extension of something you're already doing. And if you're in an agile flow, you're doing a bit of design, a bit of implementation, and every time you're doing a bit of design, you also do a bit of design time security. And you're looking at, is this thing, are we building this correctly? Like, are we going to go and implement this correctly? And I think that's also a nice way just to follow on from our first conversation around the OWASP top 10. In their number 4, insecure design, they really express it very well. Why do you want a secure design? And it's really the difference between having an insecure design, which you can implement perfectly, but you're still going to have security flaws because by definition, there's a flaw in the design, even though you've built it correctly. And conversely, if you have a secure design, you could still botch the implementation. You could still include security bugs by implementing it incorrectly. And you need both of those things to be right. You need to have a secure design, which you then implement correctly. So you can't do, if you have only one of those two things, you're missing out on the other.
Yeah, I think, it's, I can see that as, we referenced the Purple community maturity model in our last conversation. And I'm drawing so many mental analogies right now because, we talk about, the evolution of the practices. We talk about the people, the policy, the people, the process, and the technologies that are in place. And certainly when we start looking at secure design, one indicator of how mature you are is how often are you doing that design phase? Because you could just say, I'm going to do the design phase, and then I'm off to the races and just developing, and we never go back to the design, right? Yeah. But I think there's certainly a cadence where the more mature you are, you would review that design on a more frequent, more iterative basis, and certainly having the threat model just as part of your regular design process. And just even if it's from the point of view of, are there any changes that need to be made? Now, I can definitely imagine people going, no changes that need to be made. But you're going to need to have things that validate to make sure that you don't have an S3 bucket all of a sudden that somebody's just attached to your code base. Likewise, that's why if I've got a secure design, I should be protected from certain types of attack. But you still need to test to make sure that somebody can't. That's why we still do penetration testing today. So just having the design doesn't mean to say that the design solves the problem. So I think there's and I'm drawing a lot of analogies to safety critical development. And you have a design, you're defining how you're going to do something, you do it, and then you validate to make sure that you meet the design, but also to make sure that the design meets its use case as well.
Yeah. And I think it's it's not often when people hear design, they think this is the old waterfall model. We're going to do big upfront, months and months of design, and then we're going to go and build it. And, that's absolutely not the case. And, in terms of maturity, I think if security teams are thinking in those terms, like we're going to threat model every 6 months, or we're going to threat model every year, that's not the way their development teams are building code. Their development teams are probably on a much more frequent cadence of design. And that's where that maturity comes in. If security matches that cadence of design happening in development, that's a much more natural and mature place to be than, we as security come in every 6 months and then we do this massive threat modeling exercise, which is disconnected from development.
Yeah, and I think that is that is a very key thing in my mind, is that disconnection. If it remains disconnected, you're always going to have the problem, right? Whereas if it's built into your process, as you stated a few times, is I think that is how you kind of get to move the ball forward. So yeah, and in today's world, continuous seems to be attached to every practice. So do you view that, there is the concept of a continuous threat modeling, or is it something else, or do I view it as continuous? So yeah, that's my question.
I think it's useful to view it as continuous. And what we've seen work in a few clients is that they will have simple gates for whether you should bother to do a detailed threat modeling of this new thing that you're doing. So imagine, we're going to add a new functionality to our web service, and they'll have a simple gate of, does this new functionality talk to the internet? Is somebody submitting data? What kind of data is it? How valuable is the service? So you can do a very quick kind of risk assessment on how sensitive is this new thing that we're building, and how dangerous is it? And if you cross a threshold and say, okay, well, now we need to look at a bit more detail, and we need to have a good think about how are we dealing with the security here. And if it doesn't cross that threshold, you don't need to do threat modeling, and you can kind of skip and go ahead. So I think, teams need to be pragmatic about this as well. We don't want to slow down development with too heavy and laborious security processes. So we want to be as streamlined as possible. And if you can make those kinds of decisions along the way, it gets out of developers' way when it needs to get out of their way, and at the same time introduces the security when you need that security, that level of security.
Yeah, I think that's exactly that exactly talks to one of the things that was in the back of my head, which is like, we're putting more stuff into every sprint plan. But if you're right, it's a very simple gate, right? As part of it, your security champion that we talked about last time, your security champion's in the room, and that security champion's responsibility is making sure that, hey, do we need to do a threat model? Yes or no? And then we put it into sprint plan. So, Stephen, this was a really good second conversation. I can almost think of third and fourth. So let's kind of like plan and work on that. I definitely look forward to getting you in on another future episode. Thank you everybody for watching. I think this, threat modeling is a growing area for sure. I'm seeing it more and more. And thank you for sharing your insights today, Stephen.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me on, Mark. And look forward to any future episodes. Thanks all.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Bye.